Member Ruiz and members of the committee, thank you for the invitation to present. Public health officials have made many tragic mistakes during the pandemic. Failure to warn of the pandemic for months, ignoring natural immunity, dismissing the lab leak as a conspiracy, closing schools, masking toddlers, boosting young, healthy people, pushing boosters for young people, bypassing FDA expert panel customary votes that we've been using for decades, telling people to wash their hands like crazy, thinking it was a surface transmission problem, when the other known coronaviruses that cause severe illness, SARS and MERS, were both airborne. Routinely telling people that they have to get the second dose 3 or 4 weeks after the first dose, when good data came out of the UK that 3 months was the ideal time for the second dose, lowering complication rates like myocarditis and increasing antibody response. Telling people that data on the bivalent vaccine was crystal clear when it was authorized based on data from 8 mice, and to date no randomized controlled trial has been conducted. And failing to speak out against the cruel and inhumane hospital visitation policies that prevented people from seeing their dying loved ones, a human rights violation. To be clear, public health officials are not wrong for making recommendations based on the knowledge that they had at the time. But that's not actually what happened. They were wrong because they refused to evolve their positions as the data became abundantly clear. For example, young, healthy people were essentially spared of this pandemic. They had an infection fatality rate no worse than influenza. In fact, ask anyone who's pushing COVID vaccines on healthy young people, has any young, healthy child died in the United States of COVID in the last 3 years? Do you know? Do any of you know? The CDC director didn't know when she was asked at this Congress. The numbers have never been provided. Could be 2, could be 10, could be 25 kids over 3 years, far less than other common respiratory viruses. Germany did a study. It was 0 kids 5 through 11 years of age that died that were healthy in that entire country in the population study. So what are we doing? Using intense dogma, telling 50 million children they have to lose their livelihood of learning and being in school and school lunch programs and covering their faces based on what? This intense arrogance is what people are frustrated by, and they have a right to be upset right now. The data was abundant for a long time. We're not talking about making the best decision at the time with the information at hand. We're talking about ignoring data on natural immunity, over 160 studies now over 2 years, including a JAMA study that my team published out of Hopkins. They didn't even do this study. My team had to go out and invite people who had the infection early on, and then a year and 2 years after the infection, see whether or not they had antibodies. Not a hard study to do. I, too, Ranking Member Ruiz, am concerned about misinformation. The greatest perpetrator of misinformation during the pandemic has been the United States government. Misinformation that COVID was spread through surface transmission, that vaccinated immunity was far greater than natural immunity, that masks were effective. Now we have the definitive Cochrane review. What do you do with that review? Cochrane is the most authoritative evidence body in all of medicine and has been for decades. Do you just ignore it, not talk about it? That myocarditis was more common after the infection than the vaccine. Not true. It's 4 to 28 times more common after the vaccine. That young people benefit from a booster. Misinformation. Our 2 top experts on vaccines quit the FDA in protest over this particular issue, pushing boosters in young, healthy people. The data was never there. That's why the CDC never disclosed hospitalization rates among boosted Americans under age 50. The vaccine mandates would increase vaccination rates. The George Mason University study shows it didn't. It did one thing. It created never-vaxxers who are now not getting the childhood vaccines they need to get. Over and over again, we've seen something that goes far beyond using your best judgment with the information at hand. We've seen something which is unforgivable, and that is the weaponization of medical research itself. the CDC putting out their own shoddy studies, like their own study on natural immunity, looking at one state for 2 months, when they had data for years on all 50 states. Why did they only report that one sliver of data? Why did they salami slice the giant database? Because it gave them the result they wanted. Same with masking study. Well, the data has now caught up in giant systematic reviews, and the public health officials were intellectually dishonest. They lied to the American people. Thank you.